Disclosure: this educational content has been developed using artificial intelligence.
Synthetic fertilizers have been around since the early 20th century, but their use has skyrocketed since the Green Revolution of the 1960s. Today, we use over 300 million tons of synthetic fertilizer each year worldwide. But what happens if we keep using this much synthetic fertilizer for the next 100 years? Let's take a look at the pros and cons. For those who don't know, synthetic fertilizers are made using the Haber-Bosch process, which combines nitrogen from the air with hydrogen and a catalyst to make ammonia. This ammonia can then be turned into ammonium, nitrate, or urea fertilizer. We'll talk more about this process in our upcoming video on why fertilizer is so expensive right now, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's look at some of the positives of continuing to use synthetic fertilizers. The most important advantage is that it will allow us to feed many more people. According to the UN, we need to increase food production by 70% over the next 30 years to feed the projected 9.7 billion people. And synthetic fertilizers are one of the best ways to achieve this because they are so effective at increasing crop yields. For example, one study found that applying nitrogen fertilizer increased corn yields by an average of 60%. Another study found that nitrogen fertilizer increased wheat yields by up to 110%. And these are just averages. Some farmers have been able to achieve even greater increases by using synthetic fertilizers. In addition to increasing crop yields, synthetic fertilizers also make crops more nutritious. This is because crops grown with synthetic fertilizers have higher levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, all of which are essential nutrients for human beings. For example, one study found that rice grown with nitrogen fertilizer had 20% more protein than rice grown without fertilizer. Another study found that wheat grown with phosphate fertilizer had 30% more zinc than wheat grown without fertilizer. This means that synthetic fertilizers can help improve the health of the people who eat these crops. Another advantage of synthetic fertilizers is that they are very efficient. Unlike organic fertilizers, which can take months to decompose and release their nutrients into the soil, synthetic fertilizers can be applied directly to crops, and they start working immediately. This makes them much more convenient to use, and it allows farmers to respond quickly to changes in crop demand. So now that we've discussed some of the positives, let's take a look at some of the negatives. The first and most obvious downside is the environmental impact. Synthetic fertilizers can cause water pollution, air pollution, and soil degradation. When they are applied to crops, they can leach into groundwater and surface water where they can cause you. This is when excess nutrients cause algae blooms, which deplete oxygen in the water and kill fish and other aquatic life. In fact, one study found that agricultural runoff from fertilizer is responsible for 50% of the nitrogen pollution in US waterways. In addition to water pollution, synthetic fertilizers also contribute to air pollution. When they are applied to crops, they can release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, such as nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a powerful greenhouse gas that is 300 times more effective at trapping heat as carbon dioxide. One study found that agricultural soils are responsible for 25% of the world's nitrous oxide emissions. Finally, synthetic fertilizers can also cause soil degradation. When they are applied to crops, they can lead to a buildup of salts in the soil, which can make it difficult for plants to absorb water. This can also cause the soil to become compacted, which makes it hard for roots to grow. Another disadvantage of synthetic fertilizers is that they are not sustainable. The process of making synthetic fertilizers is energy intensive, and it requires a lot of fossil fuels. In fact, one study found that the production of nitrogen fertilizer is responsible for 1.4% of global carbon dioxide emissions. This means that synthetic fertilizers are not an environmentally friendly option. A third disadvantage of synthetic fertilizers is that they are expensive. As we mentioned earlier, the cost of fertilizer has been rising in recent years due to a variety of factors, including the pandemic, supply chain issues, and the war in Ukraine. This is a problem because fertilizer is essential for food production. When fertilizer prices go up, it makes food more expensive, which can lead to food insecurity. In fact, one study found that a 10% increase in fertilizer prices leads to a 7% increase in food prices. Despite these disadvantages, many countries continue to rely heavily on synthetic fertilizers. This is because they are so effective at increasing crop yields, and because they are relatively cheap and easy to use. However, as the environmental impacts of synthetic fertilizers become more apparent. Many countries are beginning to phase them out in favor of more sustainable options such as organic fertilizers. So, what would happen if we kept using synthetic fertilizers for another 100 years? To answer this question, we need to consider both the short-term and long-term effects. In the short term, we would be able to feed many more people and we would be able to produce crops with higher yields and nutrient levels. However, in the long term, the environmental impacts of synthetic fertilizers would become more apparent. Water and air pollution would increase, and soil quality would degrade. In addition, we would become more reliant on fossil fuels to produce fertilizer, which would contribute to climate change. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to continue using synthetic fertilizers is a complex one. There are many factors to consider, including the environmental impacts, the cost, and the availability of alternatives. However, as we move forward, it is clear that we need to find more sustainable ways of feeding the world's population. One way we could do this is by using precision agriculture techniques. Precision agriculture is a farming approach that uses technology to optimize fertilizer use. By using things like GPS and remote sensing, farmers can apply fertilizer only to the areas of their fields that need it. This can reduce waste and help protect the environment. Another option is to develop new types of fertilizers that are more environmentally friendly. For example, one company is developing a fertilizer that uses microbes to deliver nutrients to crops. This type of fertilizer has the potential to be much more efficient and environmentally friendly than traditional synthetic fertilizers. In addition to changing the way we fertilize crops, we also need to change the way we farm. We need to move away from practices like monoculture, which can deplete soil nutrients and make crops more susceptible to pests and diseases. We also need to find ways to reduce food waste, which accounts for 30% of all food produced globally. By reducing food waste, we can use fewer resources to produce food. The future of food production will require a combination of technological innovation, policy changes, and individual action. We all need to do our part to ensure that we have a sustainable and secure food supply for future generations. If you want to learn more about what you can do, check out our channel, Reimagine World. Thanks for watching. We hope you learned something new. If you want to support our work, please subscribe, like, and share the videos.